March 15, 2019, Detroit. Steven Seagal had been planning this moment for 3 months. The Aikido master who'd spent decades claiming he could take down any fighter stepped onto the warehouse set and challenged Mike Tyson to a real fight. Iron Mike laughed. Everyone laughed. The cameras weren't even rolling. But when Seagal's hand moved to the prop gun on the craft services table, the laughter stopped. Security coordinator Frank Morrison saw it first, the way Seagal's fingers wrapped around the weapon, the way his eyes went dead, the way 20 years of Hollywood rage finally found its target. What happened in the next 4 minutes would expose the biggest money laundering scheme in entertainment history. 3 people would die, and Frank Morrison would learn that some family secrets are worth killing for. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Frank Morrison's 25 years in Hollywood had taught him to read people like scripts. Every tell, every false note, every moment when someone stepped out of character. But as Steven Seagal's fingers tightened around what should have been a harmless prop, Frank realized he'd been reading the wrong story entirely. "Steven, that's not," Frank started, moving forward from his position near the monitors. Seagal's eyes never left Tyson. The warehouse fell silent except for the hum of Klieg lights and the distant rumble of Detroit traffic. Crew members froze mid-motion, grips holding cables, the script supervisor clutching her clipboard. Even the catering guy stopped stirring coffee. Mike Tyson's laugh died in his throat. The former heavyweight champion's body language shifted from amused to alert. 40 years of survival instincts kicking in. "What you doing there, Steven?" Showing everyone what real fighting looks like. Seagal's voice carried that familiar monotone arrogance, but underneath Frank caught something else. Desperation, no gloves, no rules, just like the old days. Frank's hand moved instinctively toward his radio. Behind the cameras, he spotted his daughter Lisa approaching from the producer's station, her face a mask of professional concern. At 32, she'd inherited her mother's sharp intelligence and her father's ability to stay calm under pressure. Right now, those traits were about to be tested. "Dad, what's happening?" Lisa's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Stay back," Frank whispered into his mic, never taking his eyes off Seagal. "Keep everyone behind the safety line." But Seagal heard the exchange. His head snapped toward Frank, and for a split second something passed between them, a flicker of recognition that went deeper than their professional relationship on this set. Frank's stomach dropped. Those weren't the eyes of a washed-up action star having a midlife crisis. They were the eyes of a man with nothing left to lose. "You know what I find interesting, Tank?" Seagal used Frank's old nickname from his stunt coordinator days, when he was building a reputation for keeping actors safe during the most dangerous sequences. How this whole production came together so conveniently. The prop gun, which Frank now realized might not be a prop at all, remained pointed at Tyson, but Seagal's attention had shifted. This wasn't about settling some Hollywood ego dispute anymore. 3 months ago, nobody wanted to touch this script, Seagal continued, his voice carrying across the silent warehouse. B-grade buddy cop nonsense. Then suddenly, unlimited budget, A-list cast, and we're shooting in Detroit instead of Vancouver. Funny how that works. Lisa's voice cut through Frank's earpiece again, more urgent now. "Dad, something's wrong with the cameras. They're still recording, but the feeds aren't going to the usual monitors." Frank's blood chilled. In 15 years of private security work, he'd learned to trust his instincts about when a situation was about to go sideways. Right now, every alarm bell in his head was screaming. "You think I don't know what this really is?" Seagal took a step closer to Tyson, who had backed against a fake police car that was part of the set. "You think I'm some kind of idiot who doesn't understand why we're really here?" "Steven, I don't know what you're talking about, man." Tyson's hands were up now, not in surrender but in the ready position. Even at 52, Iron Mike could probably end this fight in seconds, if Seagal didn't have a gun. Frank started moving, using the shadows between equipment to circle around behind Seagal. His radio crackled with confused chatter from his security team, but he switched it off. Whatever was about to happen, he needed complete focus. "Ask Tank," Seagal called out, loud enough for the entire crew to hear. Ask him why his daughter's production company got $20 million in financing from investors who don't exist. Ask him why we're shooting in a warehouse that's been closed for tax purposes for 3 years. Ask him. Frank launched himself forward, 40 years of stunt training compressed into one desperate tackle. He hit Seagal at the waist, driving them both into the craft services table in an explosion of coffee and pastries. The gun flew from Seagal's hand, clattering across the concrete floor. But as Frank pinned the other man down, Seagal smiled, actually smiled, and whispered just loud enough for Frank to hear, "Too late, Tank. They already know you figured it out. Why do you think I'm here?" Across the warehouse, Frank heard his daughter screaming his name. When he looked up, 3 men in suits had entered through the loading dock doors, men who definitely weren't part of the film crew. They moved with the kind of purposeful calm that Frank recognized from his darkest days in the industry, when studio fixers made problems disappear permanently. The cameras kept rolling, but Frank finally understood they weren't making a movie at all. They were documenting evidence, and he was about to become the star of his own final performance. Time fractured into slow-motion chaos, the kind Frank had choreographed 1,000 times but never lived through with real stakes. The 3 suited men moved like sharks through clear water, purposeful, unhurried, lethal. Frank's grip tightened on Seagal's shoulders, but his mind was already calculating angles, distances, escape routes that didn't exist. "Dad!" Lisa's scream cut through the warehouse's industrial acoustics, echoing off concrete walls and metal scaffolding. The sound hit Frank like a physical blow, 25 years of protective instinct flooding his system with adrenaline. Seagal shifted beneath him, not struggling but settling into position like a man who'd done this before. "You never told her, did you?" His voice was eerily calm for someone pinned to a floor covered in coffee grounds and crushed Danish pastries. About Bucharest, about what really happened on the Meridian Pictures lot. Frank's blood turned to ice water. Bucharest was a name from 15 years ago, from the incident that had ended his directing career and driven him into the shadows of private security. Nobody was supposed to know about Bucharest except the studio lawyers and the handful of executives who'd buried the story so deep it might as well have been in another dimension. "How do you—" "Because I was there, Tank." Seagal's smile was all teeth and malice. Not on set, but in the room where they decided what story to tell the press, where they decided whose career got sacrificed to protect the bigger fish. Across the warehouse, Mike Tyson had backed against the fake police cruiser, his fighter's instincts warring with confusion. The crew stood frozen in tableau, some still holding equipment, others with phones halfway to their ears, all of them processing the fact that their buddy cop comedy had just become something else entirely. The suited men were closer now, their shoes clicking against concrete with the steady rhythm of a countdown timer. Frank recognized the type, corporate security, the kind that handled problems too messy for regular law enforcement. He'd worked with men like this in his darker days, before Lisa was born, when the industry's secret machinery still had use for someone with his particular skills. "Lisa, get everyone out," Frank called without taking his eyes off the approaching men. "Fire drill, gas leak, I don't care what you tell them." But even as he said it, Frank knew it was too late. The warehouse's main exits were already blocked. Through the grimy industrial windows, he could see more figures moving in the shadows of the parking lot. This wasn't a spontaneous confrontation. It was a trap that had been months in the making. "She can't hear you," Seagal whispered. "They've cut the radio frequencies. Professional job. These aren't the kind of people who leave loose ends." Frank's daughter was across the warehouse now, arguing with her assistant director, both of them trying to make sense of a situation that had spiraled beyond anyone's control. At 32, Lisa had her mother's fierce intelligence and stubborn streak, qualities that had helped her build a successful production company but might get her killed today. The assistant director, a nervous kid named Marcus, who'd been shadowing Lisa all week, kept gesturing toward the exits, but the suited men were positioned to intercept anyone who tried to leave. Frank watched his daughter's face as she realized they were all prisoners in what she'd thought was her own domain. "You want to know the beautiful part?" Seagal's voice was conversational now, almost friendly. "She really doesn't know. Your precious daughter actually believes she's making a movie, believes the financing is legitimate, believes the investors are real. She's been the perfect front because her ignorance is genuine. Frank's hands trembled with the urge to silence Seagal permanently, but violence wouldn't solve this. Not when Lisa was 40 feet away and there were at least 6 armed men between her and safety. He needed information, needed to understand the scope of what they'd walked into. What do you want? What I want, Seagal laughed, a sound like breaking glass. I want to not die in this warehouse. But that ship sailed the moment I decided to grow a conscience. His voice dropped to a whisper. They needed someone expendable to force your hand. Congratulations, Tank. You're about to watch your daughter learn what her father really is. The lead suit, tall, gray-haired, wearing an expensive overcoat despite the warehouse's industrial heating, had reached the edge of the set. He surveyed the scene with the detached professionalism of a surgeon preparing for a difficult operation. When he spoke, his voice carried the flat authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. Mr. Morrison, if you would please step away from Mr. Seagal, we can begin resolving this situation with minimal disruption to the production schedule. Frank's world narrowed to a single terrible clarity. 15 years of hiding, of building a quiet life protecting other people's secrets, of believing he could keep Lisa safe by staying in the shadows. All of it had been an illusion. The past had finally caught up, and it was wearing $1,000 suits and carrying the kind of credentials that made local law enforcement look the other way. He released Seagal and stood slowly, hands visible, mind racing through possibilities that all ended badly. The gray-haired man reached into his overcoat with deliberate precision, and Frank's muscles coiled instinctively. But instead of a weapon, the man withdrew a manila envelope, its edges worn from handling. The sight of it hit Frank like a physical blow. He'd seen that envelope before, 15 years ago, in a lawyer's office that smelled of mahogany and buried secrets. Mr. Morrison, I believe you recognize this. The man's voice carried the flat professionalism of a coroner delivering bad news. Meridian Pictures was very thorough in their documentation. Every photograph, every witness statement, every piece of evidence that disappeared from the official investigation. Frank's vision tunneled. The warehouse, the fake movie set, the crew, even Lisa's voice calling his name, all of it faded into background static. Because inside that envelope was proof of the one thing he'd spent 15 years ensuring would never surface. Bucharest hadn't been an accident. You see, Mr. Morrison, when Meridian Pictures buried this story, they didn't destroy the evidence. They simply relocated it. The man opened the envelope with surgical care, revealing the corner of a black and white photograph. Insurance companies require such thorough documentation, don't they? Even when claims are never filed. Seagal pushed himself up from the floor, coffee grounds and pastry crumbs clinging to his black tactical gear. Tell her, Tank. Tell your daughter what really happened to Director Kozlov. Tell her why his widow still lives in that psychiatric facility in Prague. Frank's hands began to shake. Victor Kozlov had been a rising star in international action cinema, brought to Hollywood by Meridian Pictures to direct their biggest budget film of 2004. Frank had been the stunt coordinator, responsible for the safety of everyone on set. When the rigging failed during the warehouse explosion sequence, the same kind of warehouse they were standing in now, Kozlov had been crushed by falling debris. The official report blamed mechanical failure, faulty cables, inadequate safety margins, an unfortunate accident that ended a promising career and left Meridian Pictures with a massive insurance payout. Frank had testified to the investigators, his reputation lending credibility to the narrative of tragic miscalculation. He'd never told anyone about the phone call he'd received 3 days before the accident, about the envelope of cash and the explicit instructions regarding which cables to inspect and which to ignore, about the choice he'd made to pay for his ex-wife's cancer treatment and insure Lisa's college fund. The beautiful thing about guilt, Mr. Morrison, is how it grows over time. The gray-haired man stepped closer, still holding the envelope like a priest with communion wafers. 15 years ago, you were simply a man making a difficult choice to protect his family. Now you're the father of a successful producer who happens to need significant financial backing for ambitious projects. Across the warehouse, Lisa had stopped arguing with Marcus and was staring directly at Frank. Even from 40 feet away, he could see the recognition dawning in her eyes, not of the specific crime, but of the fact that her father was at the center of something that went far beyond a movie set gone wrong. "We've been patient, Mr. Morrison. Your daughter's production company has laundered nearly $40 million through 3 separate films over the past 2 years, all of it backed by your reputation, your connections, your ability to make people trust what they're seeing." The man's smile was winter cold, but patience has its limits. Frank felt the last 15 years of his life, the careful construction of a new identity, the gradual rebuilding of his relationship with Lisa, the quiet satisfaction of protecting other people instead of endangering them, crumble like a set piece made of balsa wood and papier-mâché. "The Kozlov evidence was insurance," Seagal said, brushing debris from his jacket, "to ensure your cooperation when the time came. But your daughter's talent for finding financing in questionable places, that was just good business. Lisa doesn't know." Frank's voice came out as a croak. "She's never known about any of this." "Of course not. Innocent people make the best fronts. Your daughter genuinely believes she's building a legitimate business empire. The investors we've connected her with, the projects we've suggested, the locations we've recommended. She thinks it's all her own success." The gray-haired man tucked the envelope back inside his coat, "And it can stay that way, as long as you continue to provide the professional credibility that makes our arrangements possible." Frank looked across the warehouse at his daughter, who was now walking toward them despite Marcus's attempts to hold her back. Lisa moved with the determined stride of someone who'd spent her entire adult life proving she could handle whatever crisis came next. But this wasn't a crisis she could solve with intelligence and determination. This was the moment Frank had been running from for 15 years, disguised as a movie set and delivered by men who collected secrets like other people collected stamps. The past had finally caught up, and it wanted to make Lisa complicit in crimes she couldn't even imagine. "Dad, what the hell is going on?" Lisa's voice cut through the warehouse tension like a blade through silk. She was 20 feet away now, her heels clicking against concrete with the steady rhythm of approaching judgment. Frank turned toward his daughter, and the look on her face nearly broke him. Not fear. Lisa Morrison didn't scare easily. But confusion, sharp and clean as surgical steel, mixed with the dawning realization that everything she thought she knew was shifting beneath her feet. "Lisa, stop." Frank held up one hand, his voice carrying the authority that had once directed stunt sequences for $100 million productions. "Don't come any closer." But she kept walking, that stubborn streak that had carried her through film school and into the cutthroat world of independent production blazing in her eyes. Behind her, Marcus, the assistant director, hovered like a nervous shadow, his radio crackling with confused chatter from crew members who were beginning to understand that this wasn't part of any script. "Don't tell me to stop, Dad. This is my set, my production, my—" She froze mid-sentence as the gray-haired man turned to face her fully. Whatever she saw in his expression drained the color from her face. "Who are you?" The man smiled with the practiced warmth of a funeral director. "Ms. Morrison, your father and I were just discussing some legacy issues, nothing that need concern you." Frank watched his daughter's face cycle through emotions like a slot machine landing on disaster. Lisa had always been too smart for her own good, too quick to spot the patterns that other people missed. Right now, she was connecting dots that Frank had spent 15 years keeping separated. "Legacy issues," she repeated slowly. Her eyes moved from the gray-haired man to Seagal, who was still brushing pastry crumbs from his jacket like this was all perfectly normal. Then to Mike Tyson, who remained pressed against the fake police cruiser with the expression of a man who'd wandered into someone else's nightmare. "Lisa, please." Frank started toward her, but one of the other suited men shifted position, a movement so subtle it might have been casual, except Frank recognized the body language of someone reaching for a concealed weapon. "Just go back to the production office, lock the door, and call—" "Call who, Dad?" Lisa's voice was getting that edge it carried when she was about to tear apart a budget proposal or eviscerate a lazy crew member. "Call the police? Because I'm getting the distinct impression that whoever these people are, they're not particularly concerned about local law enforcement." She was right, of course. The gray-haired man and his associates moved with the confidence of people who'd already handled any potential official complications. This warehouse, this production, probably this entire city block, all of it was under their control now. "Your daughter has excellent instincts," the gray-haired man said, addressing Frank but keeping his eyes on Lisa. "It's one of the qualities that made her such an attractive business partner." "Business partner?" Lisa's voice climbed an octave. "I've never seen you before in my life. I don't know who you are or what you want, but if you think you can just—" "Raven's Flight Productions," the man said quietly. "43 million in financing over 18 months. Blood and vengeance, dark streets, and now this charming buddy cop project. Your company has been remarkably successful at attracting investment capital, Miss Morrison." Frank watched his daughter's face as the pieces fell into place. Lisa was brilliant, too brilliant to miss the implications when they were laid out so clearly. Her production company had indeed been unusually successful at securing financing, often from investors who preferred to remain anonymous, through channels that were complex enough to make Frank nervous whenever she'd mentioned them. He'd told himself it was just modern business, the way independent films got made in an era of global financing and shell companies. He'd wanted to believe that Lisa's success was purely her own achievement, built on talent and determination, rather than the carefully constructed house of cards that was apparently collapsing around them. "You used me," Lisa whispered, but she was looking at Frank, not the gray-haired man. "This whole time you've been, what, vouching for me? Using your reputation to make people trust my projects?" Frank's throat felt like sandpaper. "Lisa, I never meant for you to get involved in—" "In what?" Her voice was getting louder, echoing off the warehouse walls. "In what, Dad? Money laundering? Fraud? What exactly have you made me complicit in?" Seagal laughed, a sound like breaking glass in a church. "She really doesn't know." "That's beautiful, Tank. Absolutely beautiful. You've been running a criminal enterprise through your own daughter, and she's been nothing but grateful for Daddy's connections." The gray-haired man checked his watch with the casual precision of someone operating on a very tight schedule. Around them, Frank could feel the warehouse closing in like a trap that had been 15 years in the making. His daughter stood in the middle of it all, brilliant and furious and completely unaware that her entire career had been built on a foundation of blood money and buried secrets. The quiet inner fear Frank had carried for 15 years was no longer quiet.